it's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
Hello there. So we're back for a full fat pod after running a skeleton service for the past couple of pods during that intense 3 game weeks in 1 week period. Mainly me jabbering on at you from random locations, the first from my office and the second from a hotel room in the Netherlands. But now we lock ourselves in for the final triad of game weeks ahead of the deep breath that is the World Cup break. So much to discuss and much to look forward to. As the proper pod, Lucy's back. You all right?
I'm all right, thank you. I've actually been away in the Netherlands as well this weekend, so I can't promise that my latest footballing insights will be the most informed, but I think we've probably got some bigger topics to discuss anyway. We are Who Got the Assist. You can find Tom on the main account at WGTA underscore FPL, and you can find me, Lucy, at Lucy Hynett with two T's. On the pod today, we'll be discussing should we zombify our teams? After a punishing couple of weeks for many FPL managers, if you didn't have some key differentials, we will have a little post mortem of the recent intense period to see if we could or should have done anything differently. And in the questions, we'll look ahead to the final 3 weeks in terms of playstyle and differential picks. Just so you're aware, we're recording in the evening of Tuesday, the 25th of October, which is slightly later than our usual Monday night slot, although it does give us the benefit of having all Premier League matches played.
Yes, indeed it does. Right. So I think since it's been a little while, and because it kind of neatly segues us into the topic at hand in terms of should we zombify our teams, I think it's worth just discussing kind of maybe just doing this game week's review because I have been keeping everybody up to date in terms of the blow by blow. Me and Lucy have basically had the same team pretty much apart from Bowen versus Zaha, but worth just kind of talking through how this week has gone for both of us. Now, it is Bowen free Zaha too, but that's kind of by default, isn't it? I mean, it wasn't a good week for either of us, was it?
No, no, it wasn't. Um, there's not a lot to say really. I think our faith in Salah has not been repaid in any way, shape, or form. The Foden benching also caught us a little bit off guard, and of course, with Andreas's 10 points staring at us from the bench, that makes that benching particularly painful. Our faith that Crystal Palace would be an interesting interim pick has not been repaid. I think the Everton scoreline probably caught us a little bit off guard. I suppose the only good point on this terrible game week, if we're both honest, was Ward. We played him over Pope, so that worked out well. His 8 points, looking pretty high scoring compared to
Yeah,
the rest of our team, really.
yeah, terrible. I like how it's now our team. It's just
Yeah, it's our
it's
team. Yeah, yeah,
it's,
it's
it's
not.
a bit it's a bit silly, isn't it? But I think it's just we've somehow managed to end up in lockstep for quite a while. But yes, very poor week. 53 for you, 55 for me. Because of Bowen's 3 pointer as opposed to Zaha's one. Yeah, Bowen failed to return on Monday. That was the big hope for me, really. Any return from him would have pushed the arrow grayer, or at least a bit greener, but somehow it just didn't materialize at all. And yeah, just a bit rubbish, really. 3 returns, Ward clean sheet somehow, 21 shots he faced, and just a fluke of a clean sheet, really, Lucy. I think we got away with that one, really. I kind of wish greedily he got one more save. So that would have been six, and it would have probably been all three bonus as well. The Mitrovic goal, yeah, Salah's and Haaland's almost ubiquitous brace. I was about to say Salah's brace, but if only, say a few people. But yeah, he was always the captain. But yeah, and it's just blanks everywhere else. And I realised the other day that it's been 3 game weeks since I've seen a midfield attacking return. Because you've had the Zaha goal, haven't you? I've had nothing. No attacking returns from midfield at all for 3 game weeks, which I
Well,
can't
we
remember
do
the last
keep
time that happened.
transferring them out before they're about to do it, don't we?
I know, it's ridiculous. And as you said about Pereira, obviously on my bench as well, really annoying that Foden didn't play, of course. But I mean, I think it was only one of Jump the Waves predictors predicted that he wasn't going to play. So hats off to them. I think it might have been Luke Disable actually. But I mean, for Pereira, I saw people, like being really annoyed at themselves not playing him, etc., etc. But you need, proper time traveler insight to play him this week, really, because on paper we had, in my team, for example, Martinelli versus Saints, Salah versus Forest, Foden versus Brighton, Bowen versus Bournemouth, Mitchell versus Leeds, Tony versus Villa. Like it would have been simply lunacy to have played Andreas over any of those picks. So I can't be annoyed at that. And I just kind of, I just feel like, and we'll talk about this in a second, I feel like it's just a good team that hasn't done very well for a few weeks. I'm not entirely sure how to arrest the decline yet. I'm erring slightly on towards don't panic, but we'll see. But I'm down from 6.8k in game week 11 to 24k now. So I've more than tripled my rank basically, which is a bit annoying, but I'm still in a very good position. And outside the context of the recent fall off, I'd have bitten your hand off if you told me I'd be here by now. So yeah, that's what I'm trying to keep in mind. I think you must be. Are you still in the top 50k?
I'm not, no.
No, sorry.
I did peak. I did peak at 40k after game week 11. I'm now down to 66k, which isn't a disaster. I've seen a lot of worse cases out there, so I feel like I can't really rant. Yeah, 53, 52, 53 is at least consistent. If consistently disappointing is okay. But I think it's just been all the blank game week prep that's sort of thrown things out of kilter a little bit, and it's not really kind of come out as we expected. A few kind of unexpected injuries and absences haven't helped really. So, yeah, I don't feel that bad about it. I think we're in a case now where you can have a good team and not be getting good results at the moment, I think.
Well, let's talk about that. That's a very, very nice segue, Lucy, into kind of the main topic this week, which is should we zombify our teams in FPL? Now, obviously, you know the answer to this one, but I think it's just worth discussing because, as Lucy said at the very beginning, we're going to do a little post-mortem, I guess, of that bruising week come 3 game weeks, which kind of reflect a rather sort of which have created sort of a rather sort of flat mood amongst many engaged managers at the moment. And we had a few questions about this, which again made me think, oh, we should probably talk about it. And Alien FPL Diagnosis asked, with so little time remaining until the World Cup break, it's starting to feel like we can't change the fortunes of our fantasy teams very much at all. Is this a lesson that we should sometimes just do nothing? And more lamentably, FPL Lovejoy belies his name by asking if it's worth quitting the season now and sitting the rest of the year out so he feels more relaxed with life and starting again next year. He says he's dropped from 400k to 1.4 million in the last week. Ouch. And I've seen loads of stories about this, from the likes of Andy Let's Talk FPL through, loads of managers on Twitter. And I thought what would be interesting to do here is just think if I'd have done absolutely nothing after game week 10. So Lucy said just a minute ago, loads of plans have thrown out of kilter by planning for the blank. If I'd done nothing on game week 10, what would the outcome have been? I asked FPL Data at FPL_data on Twitter to look into this for me, and I think it's actually quite an interesting thing to discuss. And I just want to also caveat here that obviously it's a bit of a nightmare to retrospectively look at your coulda, woulda, shouldas in terms of FPL. I mean, it's obviously tainted a bit by hindsight. It's one of those things that you need a bit of creative license to do, just because you can't be entirely subjective about this. You can have that kind of creeping determinism. I knew it all along, kind of kicking in, but nonetheless, I think what was quite interesting and fun to do is just to perform this post mortem and figure out if there's any lessons really to be learned about a period like this in FPL. So, over the last 3 weeks, Lucy, you made a grand total of 2 points through your management. And
Thank you very much. It's a great result. We're all very pleased with it.
yeah, that involved 4 transfers, I think. And I lost 1 point over the last 3 weeks due to my management, which again just kind of perhaps shows that we should have just walked away from FPL for a whole week and we'd be absolutely fine. It's amazing, really, isn't it? I think that most of us did that kind of indirect route, didn't we? Of selling KDB to get to Foden via buying Trossard and Salah and then moving Trossard out for Foden for this week. I don't know. Can you pick holes in that? Because I think even though in hindsight you might be thinking, oh yeah, you know what, you should have done this, should have done that. I still think that's perfectly reasonable.
Yeah, I think the Trossard blanking against Nottingham Forest and then returning against City was probably the most peak FPL thing that has ever happened in the history of the world in terms of just random events that you can't really predict, making you feel miserable. I think there are lots of reasons why people will have been slightly thrown off course in the last few weeks. So obviously we had the Maddison suspension, the James injury, the Trent injury that wasn't really an injury in the end, but kind of fooled us all. I think that probably forced people into this kind of shift, which is probably a quicker shift than we'd have ever liked to have done. And it does always come with the risk that we might miss points here and there. But I think there was quite solid kind of rationale between that switch, particularly given the conversation we'd had about value and the value that Foden offered over KDB. I don't think the uncertainty and, well, if we're honest, continued disappointment from Liverpool has helped. When we last spoke, it was all a bit in the air. They've tried new formations, they had new injuries, there's kind of been new confusion. Maybe we didn't update our kind of thinking on them and our expectations around them enough. But I don't think it was outrageous to suspect that Salah would do well out of the fixtures he had. So yeah, it just feels like bad luck more than it does bad judgment.
Maybe I feel like we just got catfished by Salah, didn't we? Like
A bit.
a good performance off the bench in the Champions League and the Man City game, and then suddenly Nunez is back on the pitch and he's completely ineffectual. We got catfished by a combination of Salah hoodwinking us and the models turning our heads, and it felt like, as you said, the rationale was there, and he was kind of a good captain. But I kind of find myself, and again, it's just kind of an occupational hazard doing a podcast. I find myself kind of thinking back to the value podcast where I was quite, we were both saying, well, he's probably not good value, is he? And yet here we both are with Salah in our teams, probably committed to owning him up until the World Cup now. And it's funny how FPL, as you said, the tables can turn and things can move very quickly. But ultimately, it does feel like it's more of an outcome led thing rather than a decision process led thing. And one of my friends, Mitchell Sterling, who I'm going to pick on, he is out and sunning himself, so don't be too annoyed. But he's made huge gains over the last couple of weeks. I think he's 4 points behind me now and was about 80 points behind me at the start. And he made 7 points from game week 10 to now, which included a -8 to bring in Almiron and Castagna last week. So these are kind of, the sorts of moves that people have been making to make up the gap. And there are a few kind of really high scores floating around. I mean, those are obviously legendary moves, Lucy, but I mean, how often will that actually happen that the likes of Almiron, likes of Castagna, like those sorts of, I'm not going to say bit part players because I'll be doing them a disservice, but like your 10th, your 11th man, those players going nuclear, that feels like a very sort of circumstantial thing, doesn't it? Rather than something that you can pull proper sort of insight from.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think those are the players that I would always be the most reluctant to take hits for because, as you said, they're the kind of players on the fringes of your first 11 that you may not use all the time, that may kind of come in and out of reckoning depending on fixtures. They tend to be the players I'm most skeptical about taking hits for. Given that I'm skeptical about hits full stop, that they're quite a long way down my rung for taking them. The only thing I will say about this kind of aggressive play, I'm clearly not the person to ask about it because I'm terrible at it. And I think you can see positive gains from those kinds of moves. But I would say that the legendary payoffs are the ones you tend to hear about just by the nature of social media. I would suspect there's a lot of epic flops sitting in the game week history of people that we never hear about or we hear about on a very tiny little update on Twitter. I think there are way more pitfalls to that style of play than people potentially acknowledge. So that's the only kind of health risk I would put behind that. But if you can do it and you can judge them well, then well done to you because I'm clearly not going to be making games that way.
No, no, like kind of a newspaper apologizing to somebody is like buried in page 25 in the corner,
Yeah,
like a drab lawyer's statement or something like that, compared to it being front page news if it goes very, very
absolutely.
well. Yeah, I mean, like the likes of Trossard, Salah, we both bought Crystal Palace defender and Anderson as has been mentioned. I'm not sure, and maybe it's kind of almost reverse hindsight. You maybe with hindsight, people always say, "Oh, I knew they were going to do nothing," and I kind of slightly touched on that with saying, "Oh, but I did say Salah probably isn't good value, but I bought him in anyway." It's one of those, isn't it? Where, as you said, Trossard in that Forest game probably could have and should have scored early on. Wolves scored a pretty crappy goal from memory, and Salah versus West Ham was ineffectual. And I find it difficult to see how I could have played that differently, even fully endorsing and embracing hindsight and putting my head in its bosom. I just don't see a way that I could have played that differently and outside of something fantastical. So in that scenario, I'm inclined to sort of think, you know what? It's about the decision rather than the outcome again. And I know we've kind of talked about that a few times, and it's about sort of, reframing the question, did I make the right decision? To am I happy with the decision I made? And I think you've just got to take it on the chin, really, haven't you? I think that's kind of the way we are. And stuff like the Madison injury, the James injury, and the blank, that sort of chain of events, I guess, led to what Alan's FPL diagnosis question was coming from, really, because he just said, we feel like we were locked in, weren't we, pretty quickly into one sort of track, and it's quite difficult to get out of that beyond kind of massive hits or a huge restructure or a wild card, which some people did have.
Yeah, I think that's entirely true in the sense that we had that track. So there was a limited amount to how much we could deviate. Once we'd taken those wild cards to sort of remove Arsenal players and set ourselves up for game week 12, once you're kind of on that trajectory in your game week 10, 11, you need to be ready for that 12. You're then only focusing on players that play in 12, that have good fixtures in 12, and you're dealing with very particular issues. So again, James and Madison were issues we probably didn't expect to have. So all of your options are kind of become more limited. And I think we probably made decent enough decisions within the limited boundaries we had. I mean, we'll talk about it soon, but I think as we open up towards the World Cup and we've got kind of that dead end to work into, it's not quite so constricting. So you can have a bit more freedom about what you do and how you think about the game, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's these sorts of things, they transpire, they just take your attention completely. So any sort of freedom you have to make moves just dissipates completely, and you are, as you said, stuck into this path. And it's really fascinating, like I guess what you might term the butterfly effects, in terms of how a decision 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks ago can have far-reaching consequences. So I'm thinking of a friend of mine, James Carroll, who's been on the pod before, actually. A few weeks back, he decided to buy Dominic Solanke, and I'm not saying that was a good decision in and of itself. Now, that was one thing, but the thing is, because he bought Solanke, he was then able this week to say, okay, I'm going to play Pereira, because suddenly there's an ability to kind of take the guy out, whereas we didn't have that ability. And there are quite a few people in earlier wildcards, especially the analytics crew who've been backing Solanke for a while, had that ability to play Pereira, and suddenly the decision you made back in game week 8 means that you suddenly got 10 points later on down the line. I think that's just fascinating how these little things kind of stick together. And in terms of the defender that we brought in, would we still be thinking, should we zombify our FPL team if we brought in Castagna instead of Anderson? Like, if we'd have gotten, 30 points, whatever it is, in the last 3 weeks? I don't think so. I think we'd be sitting here going, oh, yeah, we played that brilliantly. So it's very much about the perception of outcome, I think, when you kind of get into this sort of mode of thinking surrounding your team. I guess if you've had a bad start to the season and this sort of compounded it, I can only feel sympathy, really, just because it is one of those things where if you're making the right decisions, I mean, we're at a level now where basic mistakes don't really happen. Like, we're not, I don't think listeners of this pod are taking hits to buy and sell players that we want to keep long term. We're not missing deadlines. We're not forgetting to set our captains. We're all fishing in the same pool of players, making similar decisions. And it's very rare I'll see an engaged manager make a decision I truly don't understand or don't get. Everything I can completely see the reason to. So it's all about the minutiae of edges at the moment. And sometimes I just find it fascinating how they can be so unwitting as well. Like, to have unconscious consequences going forward. But hey, I mean, uh, do you think the die had been cast a long time ago then, in terms of our outcome this week? Was it the Madison injury? Was it kind of before that? I mean, when do you think?
I don't really know. It's difficult because I think we had wildcards which we acknowledged were already in a state of flux before we had any other additional issues to deal with. And then we had the combination of an Isak injury, followed by a James injury, that there was kind of a series of different events over several weeks, which in a sense we hadn't kind of forced through our own decisions, but kind of because they happened in the order they happened kind of back to back, it really restricted our options. So if you make choices based on what's happening to you on that basis, there's not a lot you can do about it, and there's not a lot you can blame when it goes wrong.
Yeah.
I would also say I don't think it's going that wrong for a lot of people. There are some pretty dodgy scores fishing around, but I don't think they're critical like monstrosities. I'm seeing a lot of people kind of gradually decline in rank, but nothing. Okay, not nothing. I'm very sorry to those that have collapsed, but not many people are absolutely collapsing. I think it's a period of stagnation, which I think we should always be realistic around a blank game week when we can't kind of manage our teams to the optimal level. That's happened, and I don't think that's a disaster. I think there's also the need to have a bit of realism about the fact you won't be able to get green arrows all the season long. So bad spells are okay as long as you can kick yourselves out of them, really.
I mean, how would you do that though? That's the thing, like, especially if you are kind of you think, oh, I'm kind of stuck here now. If that makes sense. I'm looking at my team. I'm stuck with probably the majority of these guys now. And yeah, there's being sanguine, and yeah, you can always we'll come onto it later in the questions. But yeah, I could take a barrel of hits to get rid of it. But I don't know. I feel like there is a certain point in it, when we've got a lock in terms of the World Cup. There's always seems to be this point, doesn't there, where we've just got to accept and take on the chin that there's only kind of small changes around the edges, short of selling Salah and someone else for Kane and somebody else to radically try to go all in. We've just got to accept that we can be that we're kind of fixed on this track now. Yes, probably there are two or three players that we can change around, but as you said, maybe it's just a case of being sanguine about it and just maybe battening down the hatches a bit for the last 3 weeks.
That's a bit sad. I don't think it's as tragic as that. I think given that we've established that Salah isn't really this indispensable asset we thought he was, that's a lot of money you've got to play with, and you don't have to necessarily reallocate the money. You could just replace the player. You don't have to spend all the money. I think we've ascertained in previous pods that it's not necessarily true that the best players, the most expensive players, are giving the best value. So maybe you could replace Salah with someone that's not as expensive. I think looking at our team, as we keep putting it, I don't think there are many huge weak links in them. So as much as we might say that they haven't delivered points recently, I don't think I look at that team in front of me and think, oh, that's a terrible team. I need to replace three of those players. I think it's just a case that they haven't delivered points recently. But I don't think that's the same thing as thinking it's a bad team.
No, but I said I really don't think it is. And I think it's a case of being chill with your decisions and just letting acceptance wash over you. It's the same as what we were saying during preseason that once the deadline's gone, your team's locked in and there's nothing you can do about it. And it's kind of the same here in some ways that within the limitations of what you can do every week, it's okay. And you've picked these players for a reason, and I think that it's been if you haven't done well, you've just been a bit unlucky the last few weeks. I think that's kind of all it is. I don't think I can look at my team and look at any of the players and think, oh, actually, he's a bit crap. I'll get rid of him. I don't know. In terms of anything to learn from the last 3 weeks, then in terms of a post-mortem, I don't think I'm doubling down, as it were, to say I think that these are things that I'd have done again. I think in any scenario, I think I probably would have done pretty much everything again. Like maybe I had Emerson Palmieri, and I took him out for Anderson. I think that I could have paid more thought to Castagna, but as it happened, I didn't really pay any thought to that. I said on the pod at the time, I think Anderson or Gay here are probably the best two, and it's one of those things where you can think magically about what you could have done in another world, but I just simply don't think that that's ever going to have been something that would have been truly an action I would have taken. So yeah, I think it's one of those that when you look back at it and you think, oh, could I have really done something again? If the answer is no, just move on from it and just think I've just been unlucky. So yeah, should we zombify our teams then, Lucy? What do you think?
No. If we think that, then we should probably just stop recording because there isn't a lot to talk about.
But an interesting tidbit. If you'd have left your team, Lucy, in game week 2, you'd only be 4 points worse off than you are now. According
That's
to
how good my original team was. I'm just going to take credit for that and move on swiftly so that I carry on playing the game.
yeah, but I think what it does show, I guess, is that we've both chosen stable, solid teams. We did from the beginning with the wild card. It was, as you said, in flux, but it was kind of a stable and solid team at the risk of sounding like Theresa May. And recent picks have just been utterly ineffective, but they haven't been without reason. And that's not a bad thing. And as I said before, think to yourself, Was it the right decision? Yes or no? Remove that binary and just think, am I happy with the decision I made? Normally, the answer is probably yes, unless you made a rush decision, a drunk decision, a something else decision. But yeah, just be sanguine about it. Don't zombify your team. Keep playing, or don't. I mean, if it does make you happy, do quit. But hey, hopefully that was vaguely useful as a little post-mortem of the last kind of few weeks, and we'll look ahead to the next 3 weeks in the question section just after the break.
Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
All right, so we're back, and it's time to just break into market forces very quickly, see how people are reacting to that rather difficult 3 weeks in fantasy football world. And Almiron is the most transferred in player, 450,000 transfers in for Almiron. And I think maybe they've heard the pod already, Lucy, but 203,000 people have sold Mo Salah, probably to accommodate Almiron. So yeah, a very interesting sort of value sale, I suppose. I kid, in terms of midfield sales, there's also Pascal Gross, sold by 157,000, and 100,000 people have sold Zaha as well. Seen enough. So yeah, quite a lot of people going to Almiron, and we'll probably discuss him later on, but definitely one on many a radar at the moment. Kevin De Bruyne too. I guess many people have seen the goal he scored for Man City. Probably didn't see the games. He wasn't as involved as I thought he could have been. 170,000, 73,000 transfers in for De Bruyne. Trossard has been bought by 168,000 people. He's done a goal, therefore he's been bought. And Mitrovic, 234,000 transfer in for him. And Phil Foden, those people saw enough in that 28-minute cameo to bring him in as well. 120,000 transfer in for him. I mentioned the midfielders being sold. Reece James is still shedding owners somehow. So he's been in the top 5 sold for the last 2 pods, the third pod in a row. He's second sold for the moment. 162,000 transfers out for him, down to 5.9 now. And Gabriel Jesus, ahead of a very nice looking game against Nottingham Forest, been sold by 135,000 people. Yeah, it's an interesting picture right now, with the likes of Trippier still somehow gaining people purchasing. 115,000 transfers in for Trippier. Somehow Haaland is still attracting buyers. Don't know how that's happened. 75,000 people have seen enough and decided to buy Haaland. It's really, I don't know. Is it robots?
Finally admitted to themselves that he might be worth owning.
I
Is
know,
that
I
how it's
know.
worked?
I know. It's just a bit crazy, really. I understand Almiron though, and a few of these people we will discuss in a little bit. Yes. Next thing, mini league. We'll finally do a proper update for the first time in a little while. Up top is Robin Hill by Jonathan Arkless, who's been in and around the top 10 for quite a while. Did captain Salah this week, but didn't hurt him too much. 46 points for Jonathan, 833 he's on right now, which is not a bad tally at all. I think that takes him to... He's 967th in the world, so very well done, Jonathan. Second, it's Henry Dean back at the Netto, just 4 points behind, 54 points in his wild card, which is okay. Up from third to second, down from second to third, it's Robin Smith, Yantan Leatheret with 46 this week. In equal third, actually, with Joe Urso, who came up from 17th to third with a massive 72 pointer this week. I'd say loads of people seem to have pulled a very, very good week out of their posteriors. A proud double Leicester defence owner of Castagna and Ward, also owned Kane, who's been ticking away. Had Pereira on the bench. Up from 13th to 5th, it's Dave Hughes, the ferocious heat, 66 points for Dave, again his wild card. He's in joint 5th actually with Paddy's team, Padraig Sheehan, and both of them have actually been in and around the top 10 for quite a while. In 7th, all the way up from 134th, it's Volodymyr Rutski. Apologies if I got that wrong. RSNPZD with yes, a massive 83. De Bruyne owner, Almiron owner, played Andreas this week, Castagna, Kane, and on his bench, you also had 6 points for Neco Williams and 11 points for Mikalenko. Very, very good, Vladimir. In 8th, up from 38th, it's Harry Lou, 8 Hag, 9 Hag, 10 Hag, 68 points this week. He's joined actually in 8th with Abdullahi Mohammed, FPL Najib. And in joint 10th, 3 individuals there: Eric Dugana, Peaky Blinders, Pete Carter, Mondo Forest, and Rowan Usenberg with Sloth and Powers Unite. All 3 of them are in 10th. So yes, very well done, everybody. Especially well done to Vladimir with 83. I think that's the highest score I can see here in the top 100. So yeah, very well done. Monster. I wish I got 83 this week. Wow, must be chuffed. Right, on to the Q&A, and I suppose starting to look forward to the final 3 weeks of this first half of the season. Yeah, H1. First question, though, is a general well-being slash fluff question, Lucy. Amund asks, how are you guys doing, and what's the best Christmas jumper you own?
First of all, it's the 25th of October. Why are we're talking about Christmas jumpers? I don't quite understand that. But assuming that it's been motivated as a question by my sensational purchase of a one of the new classic football shirts, Christmas jumpers. If you're not familiar with classic football shirts, you should be.
What was your Christmas jumper?
It's based on a mid-90s Barcelona away kit with Ronaldo on the back, but it's been like modified. So in certain decorations, so for example, the FC Barcelona badge is actually just a big Christmas pudding. There's Santa hats down the trim. Feliz Navidad all over it. It's great.
Right. Sounds very good. Okay, well, maybe I'll have a look into these things. I did get the Fiorentina, the classic Fiorentina shirt from the Batistuta on the back from the 90s. So maybe I should see if I can get a Christmas
There's a
version of that.
Batistuta one. There
Is
is a
there?
ho instead of Nintendo, it's got ho 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 written across it
Oh, okay. Now I'm
with
interested.
Batistuta on the back. Yeah,
Now I'm
Tom's already
interested.
ordered that one. Yeah,
Yeah,
cool.
no, maybe I should. Maybe I'll do the same. Follow suit. I can meet up with him. We can both kind of sit together in the same outfit. That'd be funny.
Nice.
And I don't own a Christmas
Yeah,
jumper. I really should have. I
what?
really
You
should.
don't own a Christmas jumper?
I don't know. I really should. I always associate them with the 1990s. Like Bridget Jones's Diary. I just never own one. Should
I
I?
th I feel again you were using Bridget Jones's Diary as an insult, which again is a
No, no,
problem.
no, no. I love Bridget Jones's
Okay,
Diary.
okay.
Nothing wrong with it. I model my life on that version of Mark Darcy. But seriously, I don't understand. I just never, it's something that just never. Maybe I should get one. I've never
No,
owned
you
one.
should.
I've just
Yeah.
never owned one. No, it feels a bit of a waste to just have something that you'd only wear for 1 month. But then I guess I've got a Christmas tree out in the garage I only put up once a year. So
See,
yeah, maybe it's worth doing. So yes,
save on
scandalously
your energy
answers none.
bills as well. Nice.
Yes. Okay, right. Let's move on to actual football stuff or FPL related stuff. The first bit is about kind of play style with 3 weeks left. So a few questions on this. Andrew at FPL Point Break asks, with 3 weeks to go into the World Cup, is it best to stick to standard practice of using your free transfers to fix your weakest link, or should you be more aggressive in targeting upside players? A friend of the pod, Sam FPL Price, he asked the same question. Would you favour or shy away from potentially explosive or riskier picks, considering we have 3 weeks from the World Cup? Does this constitute a free pass, he says, to do what we like? And Adam Pritchard, 35, who asks, with so little time left, is there a Moriarty on hips, or are they still fair game? I guess I know what you're going to say about taking hits, Lucy, and all of this. I'm assuming it's something around playing so carefully and safely. I mean, what do you think here?
Yes, I would. That was a very shocking answer to anyone who regularly listens to the pod, I know. I think in answer to FPL Point Break's question about whether you should consider fixing weak links or aggressively targeting upside players, ideally you probably want to do both. So you probably want to see if you can address the weaker links with an upside player. I don't think it's particularly problematic looking a little riskier. I guess it depends how weak your weak links are. I think you can afford to take a few more risks around what you leave on your bench. So if you've got some riskier picks, you can take those knowing that you've only got a couple of weeks to stumble through. I think it probably is worth noting that this is the last week you can really take advantage of Pereira's fixture. So if you want to leave yourself a bit short, this would be the week to do it probably. I think it's probably worth being mindful of players that are on 4 yellow cards. I think that can be easily overlooked and they're quite popular players. So Gehi, Saliba, Dallo, Cher, Tony, and Jesus are all on 4 yellow cards. So I wouldn't be taking hits for them. I think if you are considering hits, I would do it for players where you can see more than one fixture of potential. So I think we found over the last few weeks that targeting a specific fixture for an immediate return is quite a high risk strategy, and you certainly wouldn't want to add a hit on top of that risk. So if you're looking in the final three, I don't think there are many teams that have got a great three. So as long as you're confident they've got a good two that you can go after, that would probably be my policy. And then the final week, I really don't see a point in a hit. So I would hold off then. But right now, I'm not completely against them, but won't be doing them.
Okay, that's kind of what I expected you to say. I could have. I'm not saying I would have scripted that entirely. But yeah, so
You would.
it's like back in the days when I used to just think I could just fill in the next part here. Yeah, yeah, very close. All right. Yeah, I see where you're coming from. I actually think in the short time horizon, I don't mind going for some of these sort of out there picks, especially when we hit that game week 16. Things are changed a bit in this unusual
Yeah.
context. Like there's no buying for the long term anymore. And it's all about, as I said last week, with regard to short-term wildcards, harvesting as many points as you possibly can in the short term. Now, as I've said, and as we've said, we are a bit straitjacketed. So a good example was Salah, as I mentioned earlier. I think looking at the fixtures, two home games versus Leeds and Southampton to come. I know you said, oh, he can be moved on, etc., etc. To me, it just feels like you're just locked in with him now because there's just not the space to move money around, and I just don't know on the merits of moving him on rather than doing other
Yeah.
things.
I mean, it was very hypothetical, my point about
Yeah,
you could sell Salah. I'm not obviously not going to do that, but you
yeah,
could do that.
yeah. The bandwidth, I think, is just shortened significantly. Like there's other things to think about. And I think there's a fair bit of mileage, short-term sort of moves, if you see what I mean. So I mentioned my friend Mitchell earlier on, who bought in the likes of Almiron and Castagna and done well. So if you hit them right, then fair enough. And the peripheral guys are often making the difference. I mean, one thing I do like at the moment is how the template has perhaps loosened from a couple of weeks back. So I think back then it was, goalkeeper, probably Pope, but that was neither here nor there. James, Cancelo, Trippier was a back three. You had your pick of Martinelli, Madison, Bono, Zaha, KDB, or Foden in midfield, and Haaland, Mitro, another up top. So I think this must have been like game week 7 or 8. I think we had about 8-ish players similar, like everybody seemed to, and 3 players were where your gains were made them. And one of them was a goalkeeper. So you only really had 2 players where your gains were to be made. Now, from looking at loads of teams, I think it's moved out a lot, and I noticed this in the effective ownership as well on live FPL this week. Like, there's probably still Cancelo and Trippier. Then maybe Foden and Martinelli in midfield, and then Haaland and Mitro up top. But I think that's probably it now. So you've only got kind of 6 players that probably everybody owns, and other than that, you've got 5 players and excluding goalkeeper, 4 outfield players that can make a difference for you. So you've got double the amount of space to have differentials right now than you had a few weeks back when the template was perhaps in its heyday. So you got the defender free slot, all a bit rubbish, but you can point at Trent, you can point to the recent kind of gains people have made with Castagna. The midfield 3, 4, and 5 slot, people like Almiron, and the forward 3 slot. So there's definitely a lot of scope for differentiation at the moment. And given this environment, I wouldn't say no to basically diverting away from the weakest link, receive wisdom to Andrew's question. And to Sam's point, I do think we're in an environment now where you can back your own instincts a bit and go with someone off the wall. Um, and I think the final question, Adam Pritchard, would you take a hit now? I mean, you mentioned Pereira as a good 4.5, and with many of us sporting him plus a decent-ish bench option in terms of defenders, I just don't think I'd take a hit at the moment, especially if it's a non-enforced one. I normally would, but in this situation, I just feel like it's not really worth it. Like, you need the player who comes in normally if you're taking out a player who is otherwise fit for a new one, you need 7 points to make that profit worthwhile. But I feel like it's heightened in magnitude now because you've got such little time left. You really need it to pay off the first week pretty much straight away. And I just don't think that that's going to happen very often that a player scores 7 points in any given game week in any position. So I think at the minute I just shy away from hits, whatever the situation is in front of me, because you've got the Pereira kind of cover option. I know there's Man City and Man United next, but Man City are considering silly goals at the moment, and Man United's are, well, they've been a lot better recently. But hey, I mean, if worst comes to worst, if he has to come on to save you 4 points, I just do think that that's probably going to be sensibly the best option, unless it's a hit that's enforced by injury, like massive injuries. I just don't think they're worth taking at the moment. So yeah. I think it's a punt friendly environment, but not a hit friendly environment, basically. Next question. Potential differentials, of course, 3 weeks to go. FPL fella, Dan, lovely fella indeed, asks a player for each position as a short term punt. Who would we say? Nicky Maynard are similar. Any juicy differential as we did end into the World Cup. And take it easy 18 asks for the best striker punt. Now, what should we do? Should we start goalkeepers? Should we include them or not?
I'm no clearer on who is good to own from that category. I flicker week to week on who I think is the best keeper going forward, and I haven't come up with any sensible conclusions. So I've left that one with a big Tom question mark.
I've got not very much on this.
Good,
Yeah,
excellent.
yeah. Maybe I mean, if the only people I think that are going to be taking punts on the goalkeeper at the moment are probably going to be those who have Ward and Iverson. Like maybe they might want to be moving
Correct.
somebody else.
Yeah.
So I think a crouch ender, I think tongue in cheek asked, is Ward essential? But, I think if you're looking at a goalkeeper now, probably as I said on the last week's quick pod, a Pickford would be the one I'd go for, perhaps. A mixture of fixtures and projected returns. FPL review favours Guaita and Pickford. I think that Palace seems to be conceding a lot of silly goals at the moment. Vieira seems to be fielding too many attacking players, as James from Planet FPL keeps pointing out. May change, of course, but I think Pickford with a more settled defence in front of him is probably the way to go. But I mean, you could look at so many things here. You could look at saves over the last 6 game weeks. I think it's Leno, Raya, Henderson, and Lloris who have made the most saves over the last 3 game weeks. But it's just pot luck, really. I just go for a 4.5 if I was looking for a goalkeeper like Pickford and just leave it there. Yeah, yeah. Defenders, Lucy. Surely more joy here.
The problem is I really struggled to come up with even vaguely interesting picks. So I was like, I think Arsenal, really honestly, are a good pick right now. And I
Right.
know that's incredibly boring, but I, I get to a point where I really struggle to look beyond the obvious when the obvious is good. And I've just filtered through a whole load of defenders looking desperately for something that's interesting. And the problem is, lots of teams have two good fixtures, but a third terrible one. And I looked, and I really hate that I've written this down, but I've got Cody written down, and I don't like that either. So again, you must have a better idea.
Well, I mean, I know what you mean about the two good and one bad. Probably West Ham was where I looked, so Cresswell or Zuma. Man United, not the best fixture, but Crystal Palace and Leicester, the two home fixtures to end before the World Cup, are good fixtures.
Yeah, I think it is worth saying, given that we think West Ham are good, and I'd agree with that, and Man United are good. If you can wait one more week, there might be value in looking elsewhere for now or rolling a transfer,
Yeah.
because I think they've got a bit more potential from next week.
Yeah, I mean, I quite like Cresswell. I know he's getting on a bit, but he seems to have fended off Emerson for now. He's consigned to European duty, the Italian. 8 points this week for Cresswell, very close to a goal as well. 4.8 million, and he's equal with Trippier for key passes over the last 6 weeks with 16. Far and away more than any other defender. Set pieces too. So Man United, Crystal Palace, and Leicester the next three. I'm actually quite considering as an owner of
Matt Doherty
and Anderson, who's got West Ham next week, buying him in myself very soon. So yeah, I think they'd be where I'll go. Otherwise, I mean, maybe it's have Mikalenko or Tarko as cheaper alternatives to Mr. Cody. I did look at Liverpool as well potentially. Like Van Dijk, he seemed to forget what the goal was versus Forest, apart from that great save from Henderson at the depth. But in another world, wow, like he potentially had a hat trick in that game. Seriously, decent fixture in the last three, including the two decent home games I mentioned. Robertson as well potentially, but Liverpool are still in the bottom half for expected goals conceded. The likes of Aston Villa, Wolves, and Leeds are performing better than Liverpool are in terms of defensive solidity this season. But there's still some explosiveness there. You never
I just
know.
think there's a lot to pay for a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah,
I don't want to add that to Salah.
no. And then Man United, Aston Villa, and Fulham after this week's West Ham game. So maybe you could think of Luke Shaw and Dallo. But I'll come back to United for the midfield actually, because I think there's a couple there. What do you
Yeah.
think about the midfield?
But yeah, Man United was what I was going to highlight. I think Rashford and Anthony are both interesting. Um, and given those last two fixtures have got really good potential. The only thing I was going to say on Man United, which you had highlighted defensively, Dallo was on my list of people with 4 yellow cards, so just want to treat with caution. But yeah, I think Man United are where I'd be going with the midfield punts.
Yes, yes, indeed. I think Rashford's somehow is top 10 for non-pen expected goal involvement this season. He's seventh. I was flabbergasted by that. Really was. Seems to he just seems to be getting a bit unlucky at the moment. Every time I've watched United, I don't think there's anything particularly going wrong there. I just think it's not quite come together for him. And I know you said
It's getting
Anthony.
into the right areas, isn't it? It's just
Yeah,
it's not going in the net, basically.
yeah, it's just not quite working for him. I hope, yeah. And I know you said Anthony, but Bruno is another one that's probably worth mentioning. I know that Nick, who sold his soul and is now working for the official FPL Twitter feed, mentioned them on their feed recently. Um, I've got some issues with expected assists. That Bruno is second on this metric called the Stats Bomb, if you care about this, and he's got the most key passes in the last 6 game weeks of any player. A really good piece by Michael Cox in The Athletic as well, regarding how United's transition back to Team Bruno over Team Ronaldo has really helped the younger man. Over the last 9 games he's not played with Ronaldo this season, his goal involvement is around kind of zero point 0.5 per game and a mode of around 0.86 as well, which is pretty nice. So he may be one to have a look at if you have if you have a lot of money floating around in a midfielder you don't really like, such as Mo Salah, who you might wish to consider kind of more as an Uber differential. But I don't even know how much Bruno's owned by now. I'm sure there's some kind of United ultras who own the guy. He's not in any teams right now and could be one of those players who does kind of end up being a bit of an Uber differential because of his price. Um,
2.3%.
wow. Wow, very, very small. And it may also save you a bit of cash going into the World Cup and beyond. The first 3 weeks back for United are Forest, Wolves, and Bournemouth after the World Cup. So I suspect there'll be a bit of a clamour for their assets after that point. So if you can buy a couple of their players in early, then you might save yourself 0.1, 0.2 on that wild card. So just a little thing you might want to bear in mind. Elsewhere, Almiron, I know, 47 points over the last 6 game weeks, the second highest scoring midfielder at the moment. Newcastle purring too. They're third for non-pen XG, just behind Liverpool in terms of their team stats. I certainly don't think he's a bad pick, nor is Iwobi at Everton now. Um, used to cringe at this guy, but yeah, the assists this week were great. The move to the middle has definitely transformed him.
I still can't work out if this is a joke or not.
No, it's a second for actual assists to KDB this season somehow. And Everton, as we've picked up, have good fixtures, and he's cheap. You know, I think it's quite funny that you could have feasibly had a midfield this week of Iwobi, Xhaka at Arsenal, who we haven't mentioned, but probably is worth a mention given that he's got he's doing all right this season, 3 goals and 3 assists. So you could have had Iwobi, Xhaka, and Almiron this week and got 30 plus points from all three of them at just 15 million. So just the price of one, almost the price of one salad, basically. Yes, either there are a few options like that floating around. The other one I might quickly mention is Bernardo Silva at City. Pretty nailed at 6.9, ticking along all right. Don't have space for him probably, but I mean coming up a Leicester away and then Fulham and Brentford at home. So possibly worth a look at that price. But you know what it's like with Man City midfielders. Yes, and forwards to answer take it easy 18. There's only one name for me. Wilson, 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 I think. What about you?
Yeah, Wilson was the one I had as my kind of obvious one. I think there's a lot of clamour around Almiron as we've covered, but I think Wilson is the one that I'd be looking at from Newcastle attack. The only other one I had was Skamaka, maybe.
Yep.
He looks like he's starting fairly consistently now. As we've covered, their fixtures are quite good, particularly for the last 2 weeks. So those were the two that I'd earmarked as punts in the forward category.
I just don't think Wilson's a punt now. He's up for sit. He's up to sit for non-pen XG of all players and third for XG per 90 among all players as well. That's really good considering he's missed a few games. I just feel like he's.
Mm.
I feel like he's a really good FPL asset. And if for whatever reason Mitrovic or Tony was ruled out of this week, I'd be buying him in a heartbeat.
I think it's also quite good that the one kind of reservation I have about Wilson is that he has frequent injury issues. And I think when you're looking at a very limited horizon right now, you can do that with it for the fair degree of comfort, knowing that you only need to hold him for 3 weeks and hope he stays fit for that period. So that would also swing him in my favour as well.
Hmm.
I think he's a very good pick going forward. And it was just really the fixtures for West Ham that
Yeah.
kind of put Skamaka on my radar.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Especially if you don't own Bowen, so I'm probably going to be keeping Bowen, but he could be a very good sort of Riker pickup for him for Bowen if you don't have him. I think I just need to quickly mention Kane as well, due to the expected. No one's talking about him. Sort of refrain I'm sure will be out there. I mean, he's currently on track for 250 points ish, 22% owned, and only 2 blanks for this season thus far. Second highest scoring player, Lucy, by some margin. But nonetheless, surely if Haaland didn't exist, we'd all own Kane. 7 to 9 points. He's just so consistent getting there, and he just creates a high floor for you most game weeks. At 12.2 million, it seems like he was probably the better pick than Salah all along.
Yes.
Totally
I think
forgotten about by most.
I think that's undoubted now that the constant must keep a Salah slot open that defined our wild cards and then ruined our game weeks was clearly wrong. I think, that's fine. Kane was the way to go. And if you had the guts to keep hold of Kane, I think you've probably done very well.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, just giving yourself that floor every week. It's a bit like kind of having the double City defense at the start of the season.
Yeah.
Maybe was one that should have been spoken about. But yeah, no, maybe Kane as well. Just for pure consistency. If you've got loads of money rattling around, he's 11.5, so his start back to his start price. Bournemouth, Liverpool, and Leeds, the latter two games at home. If Kulusevski is back fit sometime soon. I don't know whether that's actually possible. I think it might be that he's out for quite a while, Kulusevski. But if he does regain some fitness soon, he might be worth looking at. And plus, Harry's scoring without him anyway. So you have lots of money floating around. Maybe he could be the one to go for. So yeah, quite a few names there, I suppose. I think for me, you'll probably be looking at Cresswell, probably Bruno Fernandes, and probably Wilson as my big three. And I suspect one of them at least would find themselves in my team before not very long at all. Right, penultimate question this week. FPL Positivity says Martinelli has attempted only 6 shots in the box over the last 6 weeks, which is inferior to many other midfield options. How many blanks does it take before we decide he's no longer a good FPL pick? I think we're being patient, aren't we, Lucy?
Yeah, I think so. He's got good enough fixtures, Forest and Wolves before the end of the season. We've all got a hell of a lot of value tied up in him. His current price is now 6.8, and a lot of us will have paid 6 or 6.1. So I think, and his ownership is massive. So if you misjudge it on those fixtures, you're in a bit of trouble. So I'm quite happy to hold him until the World Cup and then reassess from that point. But I still think even after that, I would be holding on to him unless for whatever reason he wasn't fit. I think he's just very good value, and I recognise that his last few games haven't been great, apart from obviously the Liverpool game, but that it's not enough for me to shift him yet.
Yeah, no, at his price. I mean, he's blanked the last couple of games, but before that, 12 points against Liverpool, as you said, not quite setting the world on fire, but he has been lively the last couple of games, despite not scoring. 12th overall for non-pen XG this season. That's better than the likes of Sterling, Bruno, Almiron. So he's worth holding. And frankly, I think most of us are bigger fish to fry at the moment. Nonetheless, there could be an opportunity here. I think because, perceivably could be a blind spot for many, be it in thinking that Arsenal are covered, so you don't have to get another one to double up with. So, a Saka or a Jesus. I'm going to hope for that. Cards on the table. Or seeing that as that spot is locked down, other fourth midfielder candidates like Almiron or Iwobi could be worth buying in to challenge Martinelli. But as you said, Lucy, the ownership's probably high enough. He's probably worth persisting with up to the World Cup. A lot of us probably have a lot of value in him, so selling him would probably be a bit of a risk in terms of onwards team composition if you had to buy him back. So yeah, he's one of those players who has a high threshold of tolerance before he becomes expendable. So yes, probably a good while until we decide he's no longer as good an FPL pick as he used to be. That's what I'd say. Final question this week. A good friend of mine, FPL Jackarama, asks if your goal is to get a certain rank by the end of the season, is there a benefit to setting yourself mental milestones, e.g., top 100k by the World Cup, or is there a danger that this might negatively impact your decision making? What do you think here?
I wouldn't do it. I've done it before and I found it's got in my head in a quite negative way. So I found that it either makes me quite defensive over effective ownership if I'm going well versus target, because you think about holding ground, which I think has quite a negative impact on how you assess opportunities. Or the flip side, which is what I got into last season when I wasn't doing particularly well, is that you start making pretty kind of wild decisions because you're desperate to make up ground quickly. And I think that spirals on you if you're not careful, and it's kind of quite um well, just doesn't really work in your favor. So I don't think it's a great idea. I actually think the people that play rank blind, for want of a better phrase, might actually be onto something in terms of making sure that your rank remains separate from your decision making, because in theory you should make them regardless of where you are in rank. So I wouldn't do it. That said, I know that it works for some people and they find it really beneficial. So it really depends on kind of how your brain works and what you find positive from a psychology point of view. For me, I've only ever found it to be a negative, so I tend not to worry about it. Of course, the flip side being that if you have particular mini leagues to keep an eye on, then you might find it more beneficial. But yeah, that's my verdict on it. I don't know if you feel any more positively about it, Tom.
Well, I've never been doing well enough to be able to do such a thing. Um, yeah, I mean, I suspect it might, as you said, added pressure to decision making leads to more stress, which may throw you off your best game or at least negatively impact your objectivity, as you just intimated. Like you may do things like bring in players who aren't particularly optimal to do things like cover effective ownership, or as you said, when you weren't doing as well, take less obvious decisions in a bid to swing when you probably shouldn't. I'm not necessarily saying it's the case, but maybe, there's an element of that in captaining Salah the weekend just gone over Haaland. Maybe there's an element in that. Obviously, all the arguments that went on are all tedious, but you know where I'm coming from. But it comes back to what we were saying about planning too. I know vaguely that the top 100k is a great place to be, but I think within kind of the confines of our engaged community, there's only kind of a few little minutiae of edges which are there, and it's all well and good to have a season aim. But I feel like kind of the checkpoint aims, which is what these are, I feel like they could just be a little bit more of a hindrance than a help and add unnecessary mental pressure, which could upset the balance of your kind of otherwise structured decision making. But yeah, I mean, that's just my supposition. I've never actually done it and never done well enough to be able to do it. So there you go. Right, final thing this week then, transfers and captains. Probably a bit of a quiet week for both of us, I think.
The Irish guy that I'm not going to say, the defender from Spurs,
Matt Doherty.
Unless I have information that he's likely to play 90 minutes in midweek and therefore become a risk for the weekend, in which case I might be tempted by my incredibly wild suggestion of an Arsenal defender. Unless that happens, I really think I'm leaning towards a role. I'm really fed up with Zaha, if I'm completely honest. That the yellow card at the weekend was just another annoyance that I have with him. But I just think a home game against Southampton, who he has this weird relationship with Southampton. I never really understand. For some reason, he gets very wound up by James Ward-Prowse, which I don't quite understand. But he's either brilliant or terrible. Don't know what it'll be. Knowing my luck at the moment, it'll be terrible. But I just don't think it's a fixture I can get rid of him for. Otherwise, I would be quite tempted by Saka. There's also the added thing that we could potentially play Pereira this week, who I think you're looking at for Bowen. So that again steers me away from using a transfer there. And then my forwards are fairly settled in terms of Tony having Wolves, Mitrovic having Everton, I don't think there's any movement there. So yeah, it's really whether Matt D is worth moving because he plays in midweek, but I'm hoping he doesn't. That's basically where I am. How about you, Tom?
Yeah, as I said about Zaha, Lucy, he's like a semicolon. You can happily avoid using it and have a lovely life without ever having to utilize it. And that's exactly how I feel about Zaha in FPL. There's a reason he's not in the annals of FPL greats. He's just maddeningly inconsistent. I'm probably going to do nothing, same as you. If is likely to be playing according to the ITKs or guys who I trust, like James from Planet FPL, who has said he does think he's going to play, and Paul O'Keefe against Bournemouth, and that kind of helps me really. I don't really see much benefit in bringing an Arsenal defender in just because there's Chelsea next, and then I've got Anderson on the bench, the Palace player against I think it'll be West Ham next week, so it's not really good enough. Really all I'm going to be doing is doing nothing, trusting in my team, hoping the variance works for me. Because I've got a good team together that I do believe in. It's just been a rough few weeks and luck has been on my side. So hopefully this week it will be on my side. It's a big decision in terms of whether I feel Pereira or Bowen. I'm probably likely to go with Pereira actually, and bench Bowen this week. I'd be flirting with loads of things like the idea of Wilson in for Mitro or Tony, but I don't think I'll be doing that. I haven't got any Arsenal FOMO really. I don't feel like it's worth bringing the defender in, as I said. Saka for Bowen could happen. I'm not sure it will. I think there's only kind of a 1 in 5 chance at best that it will happen, but my head could be turned if there is massive Arsenal FOMO. Again, I'm not entirely sure that I want to do it, and I also have Mitrovic away at Man City in my game week 15 to think about. Again, I may think, oh well, I'll play Mitrovic then, hope he gets some change out of the likes of Diaz and the Kanji. That could possibly happen. So yeah, I might turn around and think, oh, okay. But I do like the idea of playing Pereira this week, given how well he's been playing. And yeah, I think it might be worth just standing still, taking stock, getting 2 free transfers, as my decisions haven't been working out when I have tried to act recently, and just see what I do next with the 3 game weeks to go. Because there are players like Cresswell, there are the Man United players, and there are players like Wilson, who I am interested in. 2 game weeks left. I can hopefully bring them in next week, but this week looking quite good. And Haaland captain, obviously. Yeah, that's probably it, isn't it? Hopefully that was useful. We'll be back next week on the Monday once more. Appreciate that we were a bit 1 day late this week, but hey, what can you do?
Thanks for listening. We were Who Got the Assist. You can find us on Twitter at WGTA_FPL or at Lucy Hynett with 2 T's. If you enjoyed listening to this, please like and subscribe to the podcast. For new listeners out there, if you think you'll be coming back, please hit that 5-star rating across platforms like iTunes and Spotify so more people can enjoy the pod.
Great. Thanks for joining me again, Lucy. It's been a while, but good to be back. Hope we assisted you think about whether you should zombify your team and think about the next few weeks ahead. I'm sure we'll be coming back to this over the next couple of pods because, hey, we are in Puntland after all now. Farewell. Have a good game week 14, and I'll speak to you very, very soon. Goodbye.
Oh, it's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?